and happy February. If you're watching this video, well done for surviving January. So today I just wanted to wrap up all of the books that I read in January. January was a little bit of a mixed bag for me this month. I felt really reading slumpy. I didn't really get as much physical reading as I wanted done. However, I did plough through a couple of audiobooks and a couple of physical books, and I thought I'd share those with you today. So the first book I finished this month I listened to on audiobook, and it is The Descent of Man by Grayson. This is a series of essays by Grayson, who is kind of like a voice in the gender kind of realm. He writes a lot on gender and how he perceives gender, and it was basically 3 essays or 4 essays about masculinity in the modern world and how masculinity has kind of been portrayed in a particular way, and he didn't agree with the common portrayal of gender in the 21st century. This I really enjoyed. As quite a few of you know, I like to read a lot of gender studies. This was a really interesting perspective because Grayson actually identifies as a transvestite, so he has a really interesting perspective on the way that the male gender should be perceived. I really enjoyed all of these essays, and it was such a short collection. The essays were concise, they were clear, they weren't long, and they were quite enjoyable and captivating to read. So they were great. I can't remember what I rated it. However, I would recommend to anybody who is interested in gender, especially in the masculinity aspect of gender. I feel like when you think about gender, you actually think about women's oppression, you think about the way the female gender is presented in society. However, you actually don't think about the portrayal of the male gender at all and how that is pretty warped. So that was a super interesting insight, and it was actually the first book that I read this year. So the next book I listened to an audiobook, but I have the physical copy here. It is Daisy Jones and the Six by Jenkins. This follows, if you've not heard, this follows a band called Daisy Jones and the Six, and it follows their kind of like rise and fall to fame. And it is written in, hang on if I can show you, it is written, if you can't see, in like a series of interviews. And the audiobook I feel like really brings this to the fore. The audiobook for this is the best presented, audiobook that I think I've ever listened to, because it has different voice actors for each of the characters, because there's quite a few characters in this story, and it's just so good. Like, I was captivated by the story from the absolute start. The characters were realistic, dynamic, the relationships were kind of like everything was at stake. You were invested in these characters. Jenkins really manages to write characters that you can really root for. I absolutely loved this book, and this isn't a typical book that I would pick up. However, I absolutely loved it. I kind of felt like the ending had a really big punch to it, and you were really rooting for this band, and you really wanted them to do well. So I absolutely loved this. If you love The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, I think you should definitely pick this up. And even if you have an interest in music and the music industry, it really delves into depth about how the music industry worked in America in the 60s, and it felt just so good. However, I highly recommend the audiobook, because I feel like that just adds so much to the experience of the book as a whole. I don't know if I would have rated it as highly if I'd have just read the physical book. The next book I also listened to on audiobook, and it is They Both Die in the End by Adam Silvera, and this follows 2 characters, Rufus and Matteo, and they live in a universe where you are told 24 hours before you're going to die that you're going to die. And Rufus and Matteo connect via, like, not a dating site, but by a site that is set up to put people who are having their last day together. And they fall in love, and it is so sweet. They go on so many adventures. I really enjoyed this. I thought that it was really different. I hadn't ever read anything like this before. I felt like the whole kind of system of being told when you're going to die, and it's called Deathcast, and the way you kind of got an insight into Deathcast I thought was really interesting. And I thought the 2 characters in this were just, oh, like, I wanted to root for Rufus and Matteo from the beginning. Like, they were my baes. I wanted them to be together. However, you obviously know that at the end of this story the 2 characters are going to die, and that is heart-wrenching. This is an emotional read. Like, if you're having a delicate day or you don't think that you can process books about grief, I personally wouldn't go for this, because there are some real hard-hitting topics that kind of deal with grief in a particular way. But that being said, I felt like it probably didn't deal with the topic of grief so much, but it kind of dealt with the universe itself and how the universe is set up to tell people when they're going to die. And it really makes you question as to whether you would want to know and question the morals of the whole situation. But I loved the characters in the story. I loved the side characters. I felt like this was super, super captivating, although the ending, it's a bit of a sad one, so it makes you cry at the end, but it was good nonetheless. And the final book that I read this month, this has been a short month, was Silence of the Girls by Pat Barker. Now this sells itself as kind of like a retelling of the Odyssey, but from the perspective of women. This book was probably the most disappointing book that I've read this month. It was a buddy read with my friends Shannon, Lisa and Lizzie, and we were all really, really disappointed by this book. Partly because, number one, the book sells itself as a feminist or a female perspective on the Odyssey, which tends to focus on male characters. However, I just kind of felt like this book, although written from the female perspective, was the female perspective of male characters. So therefore you just focused on the male characters in the story. You actually didn't get to feel and see what the women were experiencing. That being said, I did really, really enjoy Pat Barker's writing style. I felt like her very gritty writing style I really, really enjoyed. However, it just kept irritating me the way that the women in the story were still passive, like they are in the original Greek text. This book didn't really bring anything new to the table in terms of female perspective or in terms of the way women were treated. I felt like she really, really had an opportunity to do it, but actually didn't do it. It was just women observing the key men in the story. So that really, really angered me. And I guess my other criticism was the inaccuracies, because this is obviously set in ancient Greece, and the inaccuracies in the world were wildly ridiculous. I think I found one quote where she was talking about this character gaining half a stone, and from studying history I know that even though the ancient Greeks had weight, they didn't use pounds, stone, kilograms, anything that we use today, because they simply didn't have the technology to measure it. And that kind of really took me out of the world, and I felt like it wasn't an accurate portrayal of the setting, and I felt that that was kind of really lazy on Pat Barker's part. And it just drove me mad. Like, I didn't feel like it was in an ancient Greek setting. I didn't feel like I was in ancient Greece. Maybe it's because I have studied that quite in depth and I know quite a lot about it. However, I have read fiction set in ancient Greece. For example, Circe by Madeline Miller, and enjoyed it and been blown away by the setting, blown away by the characters, and blown away by the female portrayal in the ancient world. It built itself up so high, and then it's disappointed me so much, because I really, really wanted to like this book and I just didn't like it that much. Like, it's absolutely not terrible. This is not a terrible book, but it just didn't live up to the hype that I wanted it to live up to. But yeah, it was sad, and I actually feel like all of my friends kind of felt the same way, so maybe it wasn't just me being nitpicky. So those are the books that I read in January. I know this video is going to be pretty short and sweet because I didn't read a lot in January. I'll be frank, I didn't feel like reading. I have been on a major reading slump this month, and I'm still in the reading slump, and it's driving me mad. So if you could leave me any tips in the comments down below how to defeat a reading slump, because I just want to get it done. I just want to enjoy reading again. I just want to feel great about it. Let me know in the comments down below a book that could get me out of a reading slump, and I would be really keen to know. But until next time, enjoy February, happy reading, and I will see you all again soon. Goodbye.